We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around, and helping the parents carry on. Standing united, we'll overcome. We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. Bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. Bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.
Good evening and welcome to Family Fest Barbados 2025. This is Women's Week. We've been looking at some very rich topics and some topics that may cause quite a stir. And this evening, and this is a good stir, let me add, this evening we are going to be looking at breaking the silence, tackling domestic violence in the family. It's a tough topic, but it's necessary for us to look at this topic. And I am so excited to hear what our panelists are going to say this evening. I know I'm going to learn a lot, and all of our listeners and viewers, they're going to learn a lot as well. So here with us, we have Caroline Bennett Jarvis and Barbara Goddard. You're going to hear from them in just a few moments. But why are we here this evening? Why has the Lord laid on the hearts of those in Family Fest Barbados, those of us here, to look at domestic violence in the family? It is because it is such a pervasive issue and it affects individuals and families across all, let me just stress that, all socioeconomic, cultural, and geographic boundaries. It encompasses various forms of abuse. We're going to look at them: physical, emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual harm. The impact of domestic violence is so profound and it can lead to long-term physical and mental health issues. It disrupts family dynamics and it creates such a cycle of violence that may persist even across generations. So this panel discussion, we aim to shed light on this multifaceted area of domestic violence within families. We want to explore the root causes. We want to look at risk factors, and we want to discuss effective strategies for prevention and intervention. So our goal is to foster a deeper understanding of this critical issue, provide support and resources to those who are affected, and contribute to the creation of safer environments where individuals can thrive without fear of violence. So welcome to our discussion where we examine domestic violence in the family. So just so our viewers and our listeners have an idea of where you're coming from, I'm going to just give you just a few moments just to share with us a bit about yourself. Who are you? Where do you serve? And what perspective are you going to be bringing here to our discussion this evening? So which of you is going to jump in first?
Hi, good evening. My name is Barbara Daniel Goddard, and I'm the chair and counselor for Advocates Against Domestic Abuse, known as ADA, and that's our short name. And I have been involved in domestic abuse for well over 30 years. So it started in the 1980s, so that gives you an idea of how old I am. And it has carried on today. From my perspective, as an organization, we're very small, run totally by volunteers, and we do our utmost. We have a 24-hour helpline. Lovely. And we do our best to work with the numerous women who contact us. And we do have men who contact the organization also, but not many. I must be honest, in the last 10 years, we probably had no more than 10 men that have contacted the organization. We would like to have more, but I think domestic abuse is seen very much as a female issue. Only females are dealt with rather than a situation that is applicable to both men and women.
Okay,
So to,
wonderful. Great. Great to meet you, Barbara.
thank you.
Yes, Caroline. I hope I'm saying it right. You can tell me if I should say Caroline or Carolyn.
It's Caroline, you are correct.
Beautiful.
All right, so as you can hear, I am not originally from Barbados.
Okay.
I'm from the UK. I describe myself as a creative and learning professional. As I said, I was raised in the UK within a vibrant Jamaican household. And in 1999, I decided I would do the most impulsive thing I've ever done in my whole life and relocate to Barbados with my husband and my daughter, and stepping into a world both familiar, unfamiliar, and separated from um, from my UK origins and my extended family. I am indeed the vice chair of Advocates Against Domestic Abuse. And not only that, I am a survivor of domestic abuse,
Praise
as well
God.
as an advocate. And I am on a journey of reclamation and transformation. And I found a lot of strength through healing through the expressive arts, so journaling and poetry. I'm in the process of putting together a poetry collection with my daughter's illustrations, dance movement, creative writing. So I'm on a personal recovery journey. So yes, just like Barbara, 1999. I'm kind of showing my age somewhat. But in 2015, I did make the decision to leave my abuser and start all over again in my mid 40s with two teenage children. I have three children altogether. My eldest was in the UK. Well, she was here and then she went back to the UK. And during that time, I had two teenagers. I was the sole provider at that point, as my abuser had left the island. And it was a very, very challenging time, but I'm sure we'll be able to hear a little bit more about that during the course of our discussion.
Yes, yes. And I can hear your strength even as I listen to you. And I know that many persons who are going to listen, they're going to be blessed as well. So we've met Barbara, we've met Caroline, and now we're going to meet our third panelist, Charnel Clark. So each panelist you're having this opportunity just to share with our listeners and our viewers a little bit about who you are, a bit about where you serve, and so the perspective that you're going to be able to bring to this discussion. So, Charnel, here's your opportunity. We've heard from Barbara, we've heard from Caroline, and we are here to hear a bit about you before we jump into our discussion. I'm hoping that you're ready to give us that bit before we jump into our first question for the evening.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize at this present moment for my camera not being on. I am still driving and I should be home in another couple of minutes or so. But this evening's discussion about domestic violence in the families, one thing, and I had that discussion recently with other persons, one thing that people always say is that they do not understand why the um, the abused person stays or goes back to the relationship. And that is something that is mental. It has to do with a lot more than what we can see on the outside. For me, I am a guidance counselor. I have been an educator for this is 24 years now. So these are things that I readily, in terms of the impact that it can have on the children, in terms of the way even the way that they themselves, the children, the relationships that they get involved in. And when I say relationships, I mean any type of connection that they may have or interaction that they may have with others, the domestic violence can have a very negative impact on how they handle their relationship um, in everyday life. So, from the standpoint of being an educator and more specifically a guidance counselor, I believe that that is where I will be looking at the topic from this afternoon, in that it not only affects, well, domestic abuse not only affects adults, but domestic abuse has an impact on all its family members involved. And that's it for me for now.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for your dedication and being able to still share. So we're going to jump straight into our questions. And the first thing we're going to do, because we're not going to assume that everybody understands what we're talking about. Sometimes people have perceptions, but not necessarily based on fact. So Caroline, Barbara, you can decide, either one of you who wants to take this one, but what are some of the different forms of domestic violence, and how can it manifest itself within the family setting? What can it look like?
Go on, Caroline.
I was going to say over to you, Barbara.
Almost like a tennis
You can
match.
outline. I will chime in as a survivor. I think. How does that sound?
Yes. Oh, well, there are so many facets to domestic abuse, and Chanel mentioned a few, whether it's sexual, coercive, financial, social media these days, physical, mental, emotional. So those are all the aspects of domestic abuse. And within the family dynamics, what you have is that, and I'm going to speak from someone who's managing our helpline.
Okay.
The bulk of the women who contact our helpline has come from environments where they were abused as children.
Okay.
So by the time they get to us where they are adults and become involved in adult relationships, a lot of what they have experienced have been brought into their life as adult women. And in some instances, it has become a norm for them because that's all they understand. And for others, it is a call for help and becoming aware that that life is not what they want or is not the best way to live. What then happens within the families, especially families that are still living in the same home, is that you have a generational issue there, because if a lady has experienced abuse from her mother or father, and then her parents might have experienced abuse from their parents, and therefore they're all living in the same environment. So it's really challenging then for that woman then to move away and to organize her life and her emotional and mental well-being, and the psychological impact, because that is what she has experienced. And added to that, if she is engaged with a man who is abusive, then she doesn't have any support because her parents are not really going to support her because that's all they know also. And in some ways, you would have a parent turning around and saying to that woman, hey, but he actually does the shopping. He brings in money. He gives you this, he gives you that. And therefore, you must hang on with that relationship. So the dynamics can be such that it's very, very destructive. And then the children are observing, and children are very, I would call very much like parrots. What they hear and what they see, they're very much repetitive. And then they grow up with that. The thing about that, in reference to the children then, is that they go to school, and the teachers themselves don't understand why that child is behaving the way they are behaving. And we must also be aware that some of those teachers are abusers and victims, because we get teachers calling us on our helpline who are there themselves in abusive relationships. So, a lot of these dynamics are being played out on a daily basis, right across the island in many different forms. And for us, it is what we try to do is help provide the tools for those women to make decisions for themselves and guide them towards the best way of making decisions for themselves. Because you cannot tell someone what to do.
True.
You cannot tell them that they have to give up their relationship. You cannot tell them that they have to move out of their home. You cannot. But what you can do is give them tools to help them come to that level of awareness that is beneficial for them. And even when a person would like to leave the environment, we are aware that the biggest challenge they are going to face is financial.
Yeah.
Because you might have all the tools in the world and all everything in place, but you do not have the money to make that move. And I can say currently, as I sit here, that our biggest challenge as an organization is lack of finances for the women that are contacting us, and then lack of affordable homes. So lots of women are staying in environments that they would like to move out of, but they cannot financially afford to move out.
Wow.
So that there.
Wow. As I listened to you, it was a little heartbreaking. And I know as we continue in our discussion, there are going to be moments that we will feel the heaviness, but it is real and we have to look at it. So you named some of the, the general forms of domestic violence. My question, there are sometimes forms of domestic violence that we don't think are forms of domestic violence. We have the obvious ones, the hitting and so on. But can you share with us some of the forms of domestic violence that we may not think are forms of domestic violence, but they are for some person who may be going through it and not realizing they are?
Right. Well, before you, I will add, before we move on to that, I would include, because us able-bodied people we tend to not focus on the massive amount of other people out there who are experiencing domestic violence. That's people with disabilities and
Yes.
people with health issues who are trapped in domestic abuse situations and are unable to move. And an example of that can be a person who have, let's say, something like AIDS, and that partner, they don't want other people to know, and that partner is holding that against them. They're controlling them, but, well, if you do anything, I will let other people know. Then we have the women who are in the island illegally, and they're another set of women that are being abused, and they are trapped because they are threatened that if you do anything, I will go to immigration and you will be deported, etc. And most of the times, those women have got children with that person. So there's all of those people that we normally don't address. We tend to really address the sort of like, the sort of like typical person. But there are other things that are happening in terms when we understand the abuse, and most from our perspective as an organization, the bulk of the women that come through us are not physically abused. They are emotionally, mentally, and psychologically abused and sexually abused. And domestic abuse, a lot of people think in terms of physical. Not that one would like to. If someone broke your arm in an aggressive way, in a violent way, you know that hopefully, if it's not too bad, your arm will heal. And it will heal in a matter of months. But the psychological and emotional and mental abuse is the one that lingers for years.
Yeah.
Years and years and years. And at times, there are women who think that they have recovered, and then 10 years later, they actually, and use this word, a mental breakdown. And that is because the past, and once again, is catching up with them, and they thought that they had recovered. And it's all from the mental and emotional aspects of it. So that is the worst, and it's a name calling. Is that insidious name calling that is there. It slowly penetrates your emotional and mental well-being till you end up feeling as useless and as denigrated as you can possibly be. You feel like nothing. And the lower you get, the more challenging it is to rise from that. So that is what a lot of women are experiencing on a daily basis. It's slow. It's a bit like watching water slowly going down a drain that is blocked and it's oozing its
Okay.
way through. That's really what it's like. Yeah.
Wow.
Can I chime in?
Caroline, you want
Yes,
to, yeah.
I'm ready. Yes, and to add to what Barbara has said, as a survivor, I've experienced all of that and then some. As Barbara had described it a while ago, I've been through the A to Z or A to Z of abuse. Um, Physical, emotional, financial control was rife. In my case, as you mentioned, asked the question about the abuse that others won't see
Yeah.
or witness. Um, the abuse did not leave bruises. It was constant belittling, and I was with him for a number of years, and it was that frog in boiling water.
Yes, I
We
thought about
start and it's fine, but it creeps in until it gets that to that point where it's almost like, in my case, I was in too deep and there was no escape. I felt very, very, very trapped, especially being in a country that was completely new.
that.
I had no family. I only had his family and my daughter. And that isolation, was
Yeah.
my support system was close to non-existent. Um, and then being denied access to funds to pay bills, even though I was working. Initially, I was working with him. So when I left, I had no source of income. Eventually and gradually, I was able to get around that, find employment, but then he would disrupt, show up at my workplace,
Mhm.
all sorts of things to detract and to create another form of abuse on top of that. But
Yeah.
this was even more humiliating, and embarrassing because, everyone knew my business and that wasn't even aware prior to that. So um, it was very, very distressing. If I went to another workplace, persons that I knew from previous place was
Mhm.
there, and obviously there's the gossip. So a lot of that was, how could I describe it? It was experiencing, perpetuating the abuse in another form, in another way that I basically had no control over, but I tried to keep composed
Yeah.
and, try to keep my integrity and soldier on without falling to pieces. But it was extremely rough, and especially for my children, for how they witnessed everything,
Mhm.
um, especially in society where these things are meant to be kept private, or societies in general, the the attitudes are can be dismissive, it can be ignored. People tend to judge very, 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 very fast without really gaining that understanding. So being able to cope with all those forms, even to the degree where the children are used as pawns. I mean, it took me 8 years after leaving my abuser to go public. I'd
Right.
published my story in the newspaper in November 2023. And I actually realized, because of the shame, that's why it took me so long. But
Mm.
once it happened, I actually felt relieved. And I was quite surprised with the reaction of some people that reached out to me. So, in a way, it's turning into something positive, but at the same time, it's still a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you started to mention about how it affected your children, because sometimes when we look at domestic violence, we're thinking about the adults and their altercations and the discussions and so on. And even as you said just now, using children as pawns, we forget about the children. So just give us a little bit about how these different scenarios can affect our children. For me, I am a teacher by profession, so kind of educate me when I see a child doing X or when I see a child doing Y, or the domestic abuse can cause this or cause that to manifest in our children.
Sure. Well, children are never bystanders. And I saw it firsthand how my children absorbed the tension, the fear, the silence, not really knowing when things were going to um, get out of control. Um, and even though, well, to a degree, they weren't harmed directly, witnessing the violence, whichever form it was, it definitely would have changed them and robbed them of that sense of safety.
Yeah.
So, and especially being in the shelter, I was there a number of times, and I'm now finding it a little bit easier to admit to the fact that I've had to go there a number of times with my children, and talking to them and hearing what they had to say. I mean, especially the last time when they were both teenagers, and you can imagine not just what is going on, but what they're going through at that stage in their life. It was very traumatizing, and it was almost like I felt I was juggling the balls in the air because I was dealing with my own experience and my own trauma, and then I was trying to manage their trauma and trying to minimize the chaos that went along with it. So I tried my best. I did. I tried my best, and we still talk about it. They still talk about how they felt. There are times when I feel a little guilty because I somewhat feel responsible for them to go through that, even though I don't excuse the abuse. It certainly isn't an excuse for the abuse. But on the other hand, I've done my very best to find coping mechanisms
Yeah.
and ways that, that they were given as much support as possible to manage and to move forward. And again, they're going through their journey just as much as I'm going through mine.
Wow. Thank you so much. And I love your openness as you shared with us, because we can look at the theory all we want, but hearing from you the experience really helps us to understand and see through your eyes just a bit. And so, Sharonell, I'm going to toss the ball over to you now, because you mentioned earlier that you are a guidance counselor and you're working in one of our secondary or high schools, depending on who's watching. So you're coming from the perspective of, I guess, like teenagers, those who around that age. So what can we expect to see when children are in homes? What do you see?
Okay. In terms of what we will be looking at with children, often you will see a drop in if they've been performing well academically, you might see a drop in their academics. You might realize that if it's a violent situation, you might realize that they're bullying others, or they've become aggressive towards their peers. Sometimes it is that they withdraw and they do not want to talk, they do not want to engage with anybody, because at times they're trying to process what's happening with their family. So you can get from one extreme to the next, where you have the child who may not be handling it well and they lash out, the academics drop, or you may have the child who just goes silent, who's withdrawn. But for some students, they're able to mask it as well. but then you would find that there's something somewhere that happens, and then they have a breaking point where they're not able to hide it anymore. But in most cases, that's how you would realize that something is up, that something is wrong. I just wanted to say here that we focus a lot on the women and abuse, but we know very well that there are some men who are the victims of domestic violence, and that whole thing of belittling and putting down and talking down to the guy, the father or the male in front of others, that too is a form of a form of emotional abuse. They may not, there are men who will suffer physical abuse too, yes, but they too can suffer from the same emotional abuse. But it being passed on to the children, we see it where the child's work, most times the child's work begins to suffer because that's what they're concentrating on. Last night, mommy and daddy were quarreling, or daddy hit mommy, mommy hit daddy, or something. There was a fight, there was a quarrel. Daddy's always putting down mommy and they can't concentrate. And it passes on to the children too, because many times the domineering parent will also be forceful with the children, in that sometimes the child is under so much pressure because they feel like they can't do anything correct, they can't do anything right, and that also is domestic issues. When I do my statistics, I would categorize that under domestic issues, because there's so many children out there who are pressured because of what they are experiencing at home, where some children, they want to do a particular subject or they want to go in a particular direction, but whatever daddy says or whatever mommy says, it goes and that's it. And then you have the tug of war between the parents, then that becomes an issue for the children, which I would say in some cases it would escalate into the abuse. Emotional abuse. In many cases, some parents will be abusive towards their children, and it's like sometimes we don't even know what to do. How do we approach these parents to let them know how their attitude, how the situation in the house between parents, how that's affecting the children? And it's heartbreaking because sometimes you almost feel helpless. How do I approach parent to tell the parent your attitude is what's causing this child to be the way that he or she is?
Wow, wow. So I'm really grateful for all the perspectives, and especially for the fact that we are looking at children, and we are going to go shift now into prevention and intervention. So while you start to wrap your minds around that part, we just want to acknowledge one of our online viewers who, Lynette Eastman, lawyer, she's thanking us for the discussion, and she's also of the belief that we need to look into the child abuse aspect, which you just did very well. Chardell, also Caroline, sharing from your experience and venturing into bullying and so on. So hopefully in the future, when we have some more discussions, we can delve into some of these other areas, and then ultimately we will have that holistic discussion. So prevention and intervention strategies. From your professional opinion, what are some of the effective strategies that we can use to prevent domestic violence in families? What can we do from a proactive standpoint to prevent domestic violence in our families? Let's see who's going to jump first.
I think one has to have a level of honesty and say that we will never get rid of domestic abuse, and I think that's the reality of life, because how we are all brought up and the influences and everything and the dynamics of life will impact our psyche in many different ways. So I think that's just an acceptance. I think what we need to look at is to reduce it.
Okay.
What can we look at reducing? It's a bit like saying that we will get rid of prostitution, and we know that it's been there since time. So we have to accept that it's there. I think laws is not only laws that we need. Yes, it's great to
Right.
have the law. We need the legal aspects of it. Our current law on court protection orders, etc., can do with a bit more added to it. That's for sure. But it is more of training and educational aspect to it. It is something that needs to start at a very young age, making children aware, and you give them the information according to the age group, appropriate age group, and get them to be aware. And I think, you know, and when we look at it, we have to look at it both from the male and female perspective, because it isn't a case of that it's only men who, as Shernell is saying, that it's only men who are the abusers. There are women who are abusers. And yes, the predominant female abuser may be vocal rather than physical, but there are those who are physical. Especially in same-sex relationships, you'll have a much more physical aspect from the female in same-sex relationships rather than the male-female aspects. But I think the education that we need to implement and to get to bring that level of awareness, and also and that happens right across the board. So we have the education that will happen in the schoolrooms. We have the education that will happen in the universities and colleges, etc. But we need the education that takes place in the workplace. Because if you are talking to a child at school about various aspects, and then that child goes home to an environment where that parent is not getting the education themselves, you're coming to an impasse. Yeah. So therefore we need it right across the board. We need a domestic awareness training, education, all across the board, in homes, in businesses, in industries, wherever it is, it has to be there. And we need to have the information being displayed. I mean, you can go around the whole island and there's nothing that is about domestic violence. Yeah, there's no advertising, there's nothing. You can turn on CBC or any of the channels that people watch, and where is there any advertising, any information, more info rather than advertising, no info commercials about domestic abuse, etc. So there's a massive amount of work that has to be done, groundwork that has to be done, and educating our communities, getting champions within our communities who help promote the awareness, the understanding. And, although we have the facilities where a man who goes to court the judge can actually mandate that he goes and have 3 months counseling, or spend the time in jail. But we need more of that. We need that not only from the courts, but we need it in other different areas. Seldom do we deal with perpetrators, and we need a lot of work with perpetrators, because no matter what, a person might go to jail for 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, for some form of domestic abuse. When that man gets out of jail, he's going to pick up with a woman, and he will start that process again. Yeah. Because you can't, yes, the jail might offer counseling, but when you take on board how many people in jail, do you have all the appropriate counselors to give them the type of counseling that they need, etc. So when we look at it, and that's one of the reasons why I say we'll never get rid of it, we need a lot of manpower, we need a lot of money, and we need a lot of determination and motivation to do this. The question is that there to actually promote? At the moment, we can honestly say that Barbados hasn't even got a national strategy on domestic abuse. If we haven't even got that in place, where do we go? Yeah, the likes of all of us here sitting down, we are doing our bit, but our bit is only a small amount compared to the fact that we have a population, and I'm just mentioning the adult population. We probably got an adult population of over 200,000, say, and we are only touching a small bit. And if we are saying that currently 1 in every 3 to 4 women has experienced some form of domestic abuse, and 1 in every 7 to 10 men has experienced some form of domestic abuse, you can see why we need a strong government intervention, a strong private combined with the private sector intervention, bringing the two together, say, yes, this need to be tackled. We need to have the systems in place. We need to have to do what is necessary. That takes money, and it takes people, it takes motivation, and it takes dedication and commitment.
Yeah.
And so far, that is not really, to be honest, is not really being seen as something that we want to put up on the scale higher up in how we view ourselves as a country.
Wow. Okay, so we're looking at prevention and intervention strategies. Ladies, you want to add anything more?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just to add again to Barbara's comments, domestic abuse is not a sexy topic or subject to begin with.
No.
There's a stigma attached to it. There's a propensity to sweep it under the carpet, as I'd mentioned before, and ignore it. So we have to find effective and impactful ways of bringing the message across, and bringing it across in a way that that impact is enough to drive change in attitudes.
Mhm.
We're now having to undo what's been done over generations. So it's an uphill battle. It's not impossible, but it will take a length of time and effort and time, energy, and so on, in order for, as I mentioned, the bringing that message across. And also, in addition to that, sharing the fact that there is help and support out there, as limited as it is, it's there. Yeah. So I think that we're on a mission as an organization, and hopefully in partnership with other entities like yourselves, that will assist in that endeavor. Another thing as well that Barbara would have also mentioned is the laws that are in place. And I know that again, it does take resources and manpower and so on. That being said, whatever happens, and I'm kind of relaying back to my experiences, even when something has been implemented or is in effect, how do you reinforce that? If you have, like in my case, I've had protection orders and I've had experiences where my abuser continued to stalk me, continued to be, try to reach out to me in various ways, and the intervention wasn't there, wasn't in place, because I think it was probably easier to walk away from it than to be able to interject in some ways. I mean, that's my opinion. I guess others may beg to differ. And then one of the other things that I think that we definitely have to look at is safe spaces.
Mhm.
How do we create or develop those safe spaces? We have, again, limited spaces in terms of shelter or other places that you can go to for respite, or to be able to seek that help, or to get out of that situation, get that break, because again, that is something that impacts mental, emotional wellness. And of course, if there's children involved, that's even a huger issue. So I would say those are a few things. But again, I would love to emphasize being able to develop those strategic partnerships, whether it is with the third sector entities, the law enforcement, the judicial system, the legal system, all of those in place. We definitely have to work together in tandem and to make sure that we have strength in numbers to address those issues. I know it's an uphill battle. I know it's not going to happen overnight, but we've got to start from somewhere.
Yeah, we have to try. Yes, Chanel, you wanted to add voice to this one?
Yes, I think Caroline touched on it in terms of the stigma that is attached to domestic violence, because persons normally do not want to come forward because they feel ashamed. They feel as though this is something between me and my partner, therefore nobody needs to know my business. And I think that this has to be tackled. Well, first of all, domestic violence or being beaten by somebody or being belittled by somebody is kind of like a taboo topic. So you have it being taboo on one hand, and then on the other hand, you have it being a stigma that is attached. So you're a failure, so you're weak, so you are something's wrong with you if you are engaged in such a relationship. And we have to, I guess it will go to empowering people to understand that it is never okay. I know in previous years it would have been normalized, and that's another thing. There are some people who think, oh, it's normal, therefore you don't, that's your family business, you don't have to say anything. It's normal to be treated like that. It's normal. Just wait here and see what the man provides for you. The woman, she does everything for you. Why you would want to leave such a relationship where, and I've heard people say, why you would want to leave such a relationship where you are getting everything provided for you. This is such a good man. This is such a good woman. Why you would want to leave. But no, the good man that is, or good woman that is presented in society is not the same
Correct.
personality that is presented behind closed doors. So sometimes people who are on the outside and who do not understand what is happening, they normalize it and they say it's okay to stay. Well, it's just a little something that happened once, but we have to get persons to the point of thinking that, this is not all right and I need to speak up. Quite often, that's how abuse goes on and on and on. Even when we talk about bullying at school, we tell the students, you do not have to sit down and say, oh, if I say something, it's going to continue happening. The bully can keep beating me. They will, because you are staying silent. Same thing with the abuse in the home. If you never speak up, if you never say anything and reach out for help, you will never get that help. You will continue the cycle over and over. And yes, it is a cycle, because these children that are experiencing these things can go on to become abusers themselves, or they can allow people to abuse them in the same way or even worse sometimes. So we have to get persons to the point of feeling empowered enough that they have the strength to come forward, push aside the shame, push aside the whole thing of normalizing it. Oh, this is something not to be talked about or to mention because it's our business, but rather work on that mentality as a society that it is not okay to be in an abusive relationship. And we got to teach people the signs of abuse, because somebody might pass a joke in front of your friends and say, oh, you're so foolish, and those kinds of things, and we pass them off. But it keeps happening all the time until it starts to affect our thinking. It starts to affect the person, the way the person views themselves. So these things, I think it starts with the whole change in how society views abuse and how the persons who are in these abusive relationships understand that it is not okay.
Okay, well, now before we go into our home stretch, because we're going to get you guys to just give some final words to our listeners in a bit. Two questions I want to ask here. The first one, this is more so for the person who is not yet in maybe a marriage or relationship with someone, if you had to advise a young woman, young man, they're getting ready to maybe thinking about being married, they're maybe dating, how would you advise them in terms of the red flags? Because Charnel, you started to mention signs just now. And I think sometimes we fail to teach our young people what are some of the signs or the red flags that can signal to you that this person has some serious propensity to be an abuser. So that's the first question there. And then the second question, because depending on who wants to take which one, then I know that this is Family Fest Barbados, and we believe in building up the church. How can we do better within the church setting as it relates to domestic abuse and helping our members and helping others in society? So the first question about the signs, I don't know who wants to tackle this one. Just some quick signs.
I would have said Charnel, as Charnel deals with so many young people. Why don't you, Charnel? Because we do go into schools, and I can honestly say that an awful lot of young people and what they say, they seriously need some input. So Charnel, you can give us some.
Okay, and you may have to talk about two then, Charnel, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I know that sometimes we see these signs and we just pass them off because we love the person so much that you don't want to. You say, well, you make excuses. That might just be how he is or how she is, and so we don't see them as signs. But I think some things, like one of the things I just mentioned about a person making jokes about maybe how you look, maybe how you sound, maybe your intellect, those kinds of things. The person might do it often in front of persons. And if you feel uncomfortable about it and you speak to the individual about it, letting them know how you feel, and they still continue to do it, that's a sign that your feelings do not matter to them. And getting married to the person and living with them is not going to change it. If it does not change before, I don't see how it's going to change after. Yes. Maybe in terms of a person flying off the handle, it's in terms of a person flying off the handle at the drop of something simple. Maybe the person is controlling. They don't want you to have any friendship or any connection to someone because they accuse you of liking the individual or having feelings for the individual. These are things that we just brush off to say, oh, he's in love with me or she's in love with me. She just wants me for him. He just wants me for himself or whatever. But you really have to be careful as to where that protectiveness or that overprotectiveness is going. Because it can escalate into something. You can imagine when you're married now and the person says to you, well, you are mine right now. I have you legally. So when I tell you don't talk to this person, you can't talk to that person. So these are things that we kind of brush aside sometimes, but they are signs. Yes. A key point, yes, if you always have to be the one compromising and that person is not ever putting themselves out, as we say as Bajans, for you, they're not doing any of the compromising, but you are constantly putting yourself aside just to make that person happy. But when it comes to it being the other way around, the person can never they can't do the same for you. That is also a sign because it can escalate into things even further. But we have to, it's not a one size fits all.
Yes, yeah.
We have to judge each relationship for ourselves. Individuals have to judge their relationships for themselves, and red flags will be those things that make you feel uncomfortable, those things that don't quite sit well with you, and it goes to setting standards. If you
Okay.
have standards, if you have values, and this person is tearing all of them down, or whatever this person is doing, it doesn't fit into what you expect. Or I mean, granted, there are some things that you might be able to I don't
Compromise
want to say
on?
compromise, but you might be
Okay.
able to work around.
Yes.
But if there are things that are meaningful to you, that are seriously valuable to you, and this person doesn't respect them, then you're gonna have to start asking yourself some hard questions. And
Okay.
we are older persons and we've been through, but I think sometimes persons have to know for themselves, because we could advise, we could suggest, we could guide, but young people need to know things for themselves and see things for themselves in order to make up their minds. From a church standpoint, I mentioned earlier about persons, you don't want, divorce. People don't want people to divorce. People don't want people to separate. But as a church, we cannot be telling people to stay in an abusive relationship when we know very well it is not healthy. It is
Right.
not good for the individual to stay. We have to offer help for both parties. And if one party does not want to accept that help, and that is going to be detrimental to the other person, then we have to have a different conversation, a very real conversation about what the next step could be. And I think Barbara said about the institutions coming on board in order to give persons, know that persons will have a place that they can go when they experience these kinds of life-threatening or these kinds of life-changing situations. Persons
Yes.
need to know that there is support out there, and the church cannot be the one that is sending them into the wolves, but rather the church has to be that place, or one of those places that
That's
is
it.
a solace, a place that the person knows that they can find some help for their situation.
Oh, wow, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
now we're on our home stretch, and just some parting words for anyone who's listening. If one of you can give these parting words, um, any words of advice that you would give to someone who's listening, like 30 seconds, a quick piece, any bit of advice for anyone who's listening here this evening, who's going to be that person?
Well, right, okay. Well, I don't know if you have our helpline number, which is
So you
four
can
three
feel
two
free
two
to give
eight
us.
seventy three. Ah,
Give it again, please.
432-2873. That's our helpline number. Okay, and we are
4-3
24
abuse for
hour.
short. Sorry,
Yes,
just a quick
four,
snippet
yes,
there.
four
It's
three abuse.
right. That's the
And
easiest way to
we're
remember it. Sorry.
24/7, 365 days a year. So that's really what our line is for. But just referring something reference to Chanel, I mean, it's awareness. It's how, when people start off in relationships, how aware are they about red flags, or understanding what is good or bad in a relationship. So healthy relationships are really important. So if people don't know about healthy relationships, they don't recognize. And one thing I would always say about abusers are planners. They really are the most they're well-planned people. So sometimes you might think that you were not targeted, but you are targeted. Abusers target people, they look for vulnerabilities, and they are planners. Yeah. And hence sometimes why you might start a relationship and everything is really going very, very well for a few years, and all of a sudden it looks like hell has broken loose. But that is the nature of abusers. They plan and plan, and however long it takes them for them to do what they need to do, they will do it. So
Okay.
back to the education and the level of awareness. So for anyone who's embarking on a relationship now, and as Chanel say, if something doesn't sit well with you, back off. Ask yourself, you value yourself, love yourself, and ask yourself, does this feel right? If it doesn't feel right, just put on your running shoes and keep running.
Thank you so much. I love that. Value yourself, love yourself, and put on your running shoes. Ladies, it has been wonderful hearing from all three of you. I certainly have gained some additional knowledge, and I know that those who are listening and who are viewing have gained knowledge, and not just knowledge. I pray that they have been empowered, especially if anyone is listening or watching this and you are in a situation where you are experiencing any of the types of abuse that we've described here this evening. We want to encourage you to seek help, because better is out there and better is awaiting you. So thank you so much, panelists, for joining us and for sharing and breaking the silence.
It's been a pleasure.
Tackling domestic violence in the family. So for those of you who love to join us here on Family Fest Barbados, Tuesday, July 15th, we are going to be heading into navigating parental conflict and divorce, building resilient families. And on this occasion, we're going to be joined by Fabian Sergeant, Donatel Cox, and our dear Charnel right here is going to join us then as well. So in case you missed the number for the hotline, it is 43-ABUSE, ABUSE, or 432-2873. That's the helpline. So do have a wonderful evening. Be blessed, be encouraged, be strengthened, and be empowered. And we look forward to joining you next week on Family Fest Barbados 2025.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.